I'm in love with Jesus, and he's in love with me. Put those hands together if you love the Lord. As you see behind me, thus which is in front of you, in the month of June, we will be starting our sermon series entitled, It's a Family Affair. So we're going to be looking at various aspects of the family, Lord willing, during the month of June. Before we get into the word this morning, which I promise won't be too long, I do want to thank all of you who served and supported Deacon Bill Harris yesterday and the homegoing of his beautiful bride, Deaconess Harris. For all of you who supported and served, would you please stand? God bless you. All of you who served and supported, God bless you. Thank you all so much for coming out. Amen. God bless you. Amen. Deacon, we sent her off in high style. Amen. And Deacon Harris was pleased and satisfied and was truly humbled by the support that his Beulah Baptist Institutional Church family had shown him yesterday. We're also happy to have Deaconess Hearns and Reverend Johnson with us this morning. Amen. What a blessing it is when we have living testimonies in front of us that God is still in the blessing business. Y'all ready to get into the word? All right, let's go. In the book of Ruth, the second chapter of the book of Ruth. Ruth, the second chapter, and I want to read in your hearing verses 8 through 12. Reading from the New Living Translation, you'll hear these words. Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter. Stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young woman working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting and then follow them. I have warned the young men, not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I am only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied. "But I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother in your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." You may be seated in the presence of our God. As we commence our sermon series on It's a Family Affair, I want to talk specifically to our singles this morning. And I want to tag this text, "Before you say I do." Before you say I do. It was Pastor James Ford, who pastors the Christ Chapel Church in Chicago, Illinois, who once said that marriage is like a door. He said, you have single individuals on one side of the door, and you have married individuals on the other side of the door. And Pastor Ford said in his many years of ministry, one observation or even one problem that he has learned is that you have singles who are trying to get in the door, and then you have married people who are trying to get out of the door. Pastor Ford said you have single people who are rushing to get inside marriage. But then you have married people who are rushing to get outside the door of marriage. And when we think about singleness, I'm under the belief this morning, Beulah, that the church owes a lot of singles a heartfelt and sincere apology. Because for too long, the church has made singles feel as though they are less than. For too often, the church has diminished the significance of singles. Even so much so that sometimes churches will make marriage a qualification to serve in certain positions within the church. And I know some of you may disagree with me on this, but I find that qualification problematic because think about this, Beulah. Who were the most two significant individuals in the New Testament? Most of us would say the Apostle Paul and Jesus Christ. And last time I checked, neither one of them said, I do. And so here we have to wrestle with this, that if Paul and Jesus, the Christ himself, if they were single and yet they were the most impactful men in individuals in the New Testament, then why does the church put qualifications on things and people that the Bible does not, y'all? Don't, come on. And so the church owes a lot of singles an apology, because for so often we have diminished their significance. And I need every single under the sound of my voice to fully grasp and understand this next statement that I'm about to make. And that is, it is important that you remember that as a single, you are already complete by yourself. It is important for every single under the sound of my voice. I pray that you grasp this, that when God made you, he did not make a half of you, but he made a whole you. Because last time I checked, one was a whole number. And it's important that singles understand that one is a whole number, because anytime God sends you your future spouse, when God sends you your future spouse, it is important to know that your spouse was not made to complete you, but your spouse was made to complement you. And the reason that this is so important to understand is because our beliefs ought to always affect our behavior. And anytime our singles understand that you're not half by yourself, but you're whole by yourself, anytime our singles understand that God does not send someone into your life to complete you, but rather he sends someone into your life to complement you, then that ought to affect your behavior. Well, what do you mean by that, Pastor? When you realize that you are complete by yourself, then that ought to make you come to the conclusion that you ought never stay by the phone waiting for that Negro or that Negroette to text you about plans for later on tonight. When you realize that you are complete and whole by yourself, that means that you don't have to put up with anybody's nonsense, because you can say to yourself, I can do bad come on and help Pastor preach this morning. I can do bad all by myself. And I wonder, are there any singles under the sound of my voice who can say, Pastor, I realize that I'm not half, but I'm whole. And because I'm whole, I don't have to wait on life. I don't have to wait on anybody, but I can thrive in my singleness. I'll go to the movies by myself. I'll go on Open Table and make reservations for dinner by myself. I'll go down to the Riverwalk and walk by my darn self. I don't need anybody in my life to complete me, because I realize that when God sends somebody into my life, they're not sent to complete me, they're simply sent to compliment me. We are whole individuals by ourselves. And yet, with that said, I realize that there are some individuals under the sound of my voice who, as you're in your state, in your season of singleness, you desire to be married. Certainly nothing wrong with desiring to have your special boo. Certainly nothing wrong with desiring to have that special someone in your life. But the book of Ruth teaches us that there are some principles that we need to apply in our lives. There are some things that we need to ask. There are some things that we should be looking for before we say, I do. Can we study the text for the next 10, 15 minutes or so? And then I'll bid you farewell. Look back at what the text says in Ruth chapter 2, verse 8. The text says, Boaz went over and said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. Here we see Beulah. The text shows us, number one, Boaz's career. Can the church say career? Notice, for those of us who are familiar with this story, we know that Boaz was a very influential landowner. And the text lets us know here in verse 9, as Boaz is speaking to Ruth, that he says to her, listen, you don't have to go and work anywhere else. You can work right here in my field for the young ladies who are already working for me. I like this because notice, beloved, the text lets us know something about Boaz's financial status. And might I suggest to every single under the sound of my voice, he might have a smile like Denzel. She might be blessed and cut like Beyonce. But before you say I do, you ought to ask some questions whereby you can find out about his or her financial status. There ought to be some There ought to be some questions that are asked as you all are sipping on your caramel macchiato at Starbucks. There ought to be some questions that should be asked when you all are downtown walking. There ought to be some questions that are asked about the financial status, because listen, in early dating stages, yes, there are stars in your eyes, but after you say I do, there are going to be some bills on the table that have to be paid. And how many of you know it doesn't matter how in love you are with somebody, when the rent is due, they don't care how in love, they want to know, can you pay these bills? You need to ask and find out about their financial status. You need to ask some key questions. It ought to start, the list ought to look something like this. The first question ought to be, are you currently working? If you're not working, why aren't you working? And what are you going to do to start working? You need to ask some questions regarding their financial status. What is your mentality on debt? How much debt are you in? How many credit cards do you have? Is MasterCard, Discover, Visa? How many bill collectors are coming after you? I need to know your financial status. Do you view savings as important? What do you know about stocks and bonds? What are your financial goals for the future? The Bible, here it is in Ruth chapter 2, here it is, we see something about Boaz's financial status. And please understand what I'm saying and what I'm not saying this morning. I'm not saying that every person that you enter into a relationship with has to be in the financial category of Boaz. Every individual that you meet won't have the means and the resources like Boaz. Let me put that in 2022 vernacular. Everybody you meet won't be able to take you out to Eddie V's or Burns or Charlie's Steakhouse, but if you hook up with somebody and they don't have enough money to get you a cheeseburger at McDonald's, you might want to reconsider. But before you say I do, I need to know, what is your financial status? Y'all not working with me this morning. Let me go ahead and push this train. Look then at what verse 9 says. The text says, see which part of the field they are harvesting, and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly, and when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well. Here we see, number one, Boaz's career. But here in verse 9, we see Boaz's concern. Ruth is working in the field, and Boaz shows that he is concerned about her well-being. Notice the sensitivity that he displays towards her. Notice how he is in touch with what she needs and what she might need in the future. But basically, Boaz comes to her and he says, listen, you don't have to go anywhere else because what you need is right here under my care. She says, listen, I've already informed individuals that because I have my eye on you, that they ought not mess with you. Boaz shows concern for Ruth. And the question becomes this morning, here it is before us this morning, that God is reminding us that one of the questions that every single ought to ask whoever they're dating with, or something they ought to know before they say I do, is how will you treat me? If my Father is the King of Kings, that means I'm a prince. Ladies, because our Father is the King of Kings, that means you're a princess. Which means that everyone you date, that there ought to be a standard for how they treat you. Which means that you set the standard that you just don't talk to me any type of way because I'm royalty. Which means that you just don't take me to any place on a date. No, I have some standards in mind because I'm royalty, which means that you just can't handle me any type of way. You just can't think just because you bought me a nice steak dinner that I owe you something at the end of the date. No, I am royalty. How do you treat me? And every single ought to take enough time before you say I do, to see how someone will treat you, not just in the good times, but see how they'll treat you in the bad times. To see how they'll treat you when money is tight. To see how they'll treat you when they've been stressed at work. To see how they'll treat you when they're in a bad mood. We see that Boaz, when he comes to Ruth, he is sensitive to her needs. Matter of fact, Boaz, he is so in touch with her needs. It's almost as though he takes a page out of Babyface's playbook and he basically tells her, listen, soon as I get home from work, And every single, before you say I do, you ought to ask the question, ladies, do you live according to the gospel of the Temptations who said treat her like a lady? He's sensitive. He's in touch to her needs. Fast forward in the New Testament, Paul is writing, and he gives specific instructions for husbands and wives. He tells Christian wives that they are to respect their husbands. No conditions on it. Respect your husband. For every single man, you need, while you're dating and courting that young lady, you need to see by her actions, is she going to respect you even when she doesn't agree with you? Is she still going to respect you even if she makes more money than you? Is she going to respect you even if she has more clout and influence than you? But then Christ, of course, Paul doesn't just stop with talking to the Christian wives, but he also then talks to the Christian husbands. And you all remember what he tells them? Paul says that we as husbands are to love our wives as Christ loved the church. And once again, Paul doesn't put conditions on that. Paul doesn't say that we are to only love our wives as Christ loved the church when she makes our favorite meal. Paul doesn't say that we are only to love our wives as Christ loves the church when she's satisfying all of our needs. Paul doesn't say we are to only love our wives as Christ loves the church when everything is great. No, Paul says that we are to love our wives as Christ loves the church unconditionally. Fellas, that means when she gets on our last good nerve, we are to love her unconditionally. That means even if we're in a season where we're not seeing eye to eye with one another, we are to love her as Christ loved the church. The text is tailored to teach us, before you say I do, you have to learn and observe how that individual is going to treat you. Here is the last and final point out of this morning's lesson. Number one, the text teaches us we see Boaz's career. Number two, we see Boaz's concern. But watch number three, the text shows us Boaz's commendation. Can the church say commendation? Right there at verse 11 and 12. Yes, I know, Boaz replied, but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. Notice the two P's that are provided in verses 11 and 12. Notice how he commends Ruth in verse 11. He commends Ruth by paying her a compliment. Might we never underestimate the power of words? Might we never forget the words of Paul, who said that we are to let no unwholesome word come out of our mouth except that which is good for the edification, i.e., the building up of others. And so through the example of Ruth, singles, we discover and we are reminded that before you say I do, you need to see how this person speaks to you. Are they able to remain level-headed in the midst of an argument? Or do they call you outside of your name? But during the dating season, you need to observe, do they send you text messages during the day that build you up and uplift you? Do they compliment you? Do they speak life into you? Do they give words that encourage you? Or is that individual whom you're dating, do they just always point out your flaws and tell you what you're not doing right and how you're not doing this and doing that? No, Boaz says that a man ought to pay the lady whom he's interested in, he ought to pay her some compliments. And to my married men this morning, when was the last time you complimented your bride? When was the last time you told her how beautiful she is? When was the last time you took the saying of Stevie Wonder and said, I just called to say that I love you? Well, watch this in verse 11. Boaz pays her a compliment. But here it is more significantly. Notice in verse 12, Boaz prays for Ruth. There it is. He's talking to Ruth, but he starts talking to God on her behalf. Can I tell you something to all of my singles under the sound of my voice? It's good to know someone's financial status. It's good to know how someone will treat you. But at the end of the day, you better find out that Negro or that Negroette's spiritual status. When you're dating and they've proven to you that they can take you to Ruth Chris for dinner, that's good. But you need to know, hey, I want to know, can you lead me in spiritual matters? You need to find out, hey, can you pray for me when I cannot pray for myself? When my eyes are filled with tears and my heart is broken, I want to know, can you fall on bended knee? And just like Boaz, can you pray for me? I want to know, singles, you ought to take the mentality, I want to know what Sunday's going to look like. Is Sunday set aside for the Tampa Bay Bucks, or is Sunday set aside for us to worship the Lord together in spirit and in truth? I need to know your spiritual status. Singles, you ought to be asking the question, Mr. or Mrs., Mr. or Miss, I need to know, yes, I see you scrolling on social media. Yes, I see you reading the newspaper, but I need to know, how often am I going to see you studying and reading the Word of God? I need to know your spiritual status. Here it is. Ruth is in a tough spot, down and grieving, in a season of bereavement. And God sends someone into her life who not only speaks life into her, but says to her, I want you to know I'm praying for you that God might bless you. Before you say I do, make sure that he or she will speak life into you. Before you say I do, make sure that they'll fall on bended knee for you. Can I share this story with you? This journey in getting to the Beulah Baptist Institutional Church has been a journey that will take all day for me to tell you all. So just let me give you a short snippet. In my desire to become a senior pastor, started candidating and applying to different churches. Before I had applied to Beulah, there was a church in the Midwest that I was up for. You all have heard it said before that there were about 173 candidates who had applied for Beulah. But this church that I had applied for in the Midwest, there were 227 candidates. And as it went from 227 candidates, it had come down to me and one other gentleman. This church that I was up for in the Midwest, because it had come down to me and this other individual, the pastoral search committee, similar to as Beulah did for us, they flew me, Lady J, and Isaiah out to their church. Talked with the pastoral search committee that Friday, had interview with leadership on that Saturday, and daggone it, preached my heart out on that Sunday morning. As a result of me preaching my heart out, Lady J and Isaiah, they'll testify, pretty much the entire congregation, I was standing right here on the altar, the entire congregation had come up to me and said, Reverend Harris, you've got my vote. We try to take those words in stride, not put too much stock in them because we know how things can go. There were so many people lined up to speak with me. There was actually a funeral at the church, and one of the co-leaders of the pastoral search committee literally had to rush us out the side door because so many more members wanted to speak to us, and the funeral was about to start. The co-chairs of the pastoral search committee had taken me, Lady J, and Isaiah out to dinner. We had a great time at dinner, and when we get in the car, one of the co-chairs says to me, Reverend Harris, I know that you had always, in all of our communication, you had always said, let the Lord's will be done for so-and-so Baptist Church. She said, but I want you to know that we are hoping that everything works out for you to become our next pastor. When the co-chair of the pastoral search committee says this to you, that pretty much everything is going to go down the way they want it to go down, we could not help but feel and expect that this was the church that God had called us to. Beulah, this was in August of 2018. Listen, they told us when we left this particular city, we were the ones. This is August of 2018. I didn't get word about the final results until February of 2019. They literally put me on ice from August to February. Emailing them, asking them, hey, am I still a runner? They replied back, yes, Reverend Harris, you're still in the running for the church. August to February. It is now the third Friday in February of 2019. I get a call from the pastoral search committee, and they inform me, obviously, that the other candidate had got the vote. In that moment, Beulah, I was devastated. The next couple of days, because my schedule was already busy, I really couldn't deal with the impact of the news that I had just received. So check this out. On that Monday, it felt as though the news had really hit home, and for about the next week, I was depressed. We left this particular city just knowing that this is the place that God was going to call us next. From August to February, we're wondering what's going on. We get the call that they had gone, that the other candidate had got the vote. Yes, we were happy for them, but at the same time, I was devastated. Beulah, I was so devastated that towards the end of the week, around that next Friday, which was around February 26th of 2019, Lady J said, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing fine. She said, you're fine? I said, yes, I'm fine. I said, because I'm done with this. She said, what do you mean you're done with this? I said, you know what? I said, this particular church, it took too much out of me. I said, the candidating process is too much. There's politics involved. It's an emotional drain. I said, listen, I'm done. That church is the last church that I will ever apply for. This was February 26, 2019. She said, no, you're not. She said, you're not done with this. She said, you know where you are. You're not happy where you are. She said, you know in the bottom of your heart that God has designed and purposed for you to do more. She said, no, you're not done with this. She said, here's the deal. She said, you have 6 weeks to mourn, and then you must get up and make a move. This was February 26, 2019. She said, you have 6 weeks to mourn, and then you must get up and make a move. Y'all know where this story is going. This is February 26, 2019. She says, you have 6 weeks to mourn, and then you have to get up and make a move. You do know that the Beulah Baptist Institutional Church posted their pastoral vacancy on April 1st, 2019. Y'all doing the math with me? February 26, 2019, she said, you have 6 weeks to mourn, then you must make a move. A church in Tampa that I had never heard of posted the position around April 1st, 2019. About a week later, on April 1st, I applied for the position, and I give you my word, Beulah, Beulah was the only church that I applied for in 2019. Y'all must not be following this story. This is what I'm trying to tell you. If I didn't have a spouse who believed in the importance of speaking life into me, if I didn't have a spouse who encouraged me at my lowest moment, if I didn't have a spouse who said, yes, you're hurting right now, but you've got to get up and make a move, I kid you not, Beulah. If it was not for Lady J, Beulah would have never been in my sights. She said, you got 6 weeks to make a move. And look at how God was working on that. While God was healing me on this side, he was preparing Beulah on that side. And then the two have come together that we might be people and pastor, that we might be fellowship and leadership. But I'm telling y'all, if it wasn't for Lady J, we would have missed it. You single man, single woman, you better find you someone who can speak life into you. Don't be impressed when she puts it on you that it makes your eyes roll back. No, you better find somebody who can speak life into you. You ought to find somebody who, when you can't pray for yourself, your spouse will then pray. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. Before you say I do, check out their financial status. Before you say I do, check out how they'll treat you. But most importantly, before you say I do, check out their spiritual status. Let us all stand to our feet this morning. And now there might be someone here today. You need to say, I do, to the Lord. There might be someone under the sound of my voice who needs to yield and surrender their life to Christ. If there's one today who wants to give their life to Christ, if there's one today who knows that you need to come in right relationship, won't you come now? Won't you come now? Is there one who